Nice. Some of you will get that reference. Some of you will not. If you don't get that reference, go watch Idiocracy. Brawndo has the electrolytes that plants crave. Okay. The last time that we were here, we were talking about conformity, basically going along with the crowd. And so we talked about Solomon Asch's landmark experiment in which people were asked to judge line lengths, and basically the majority of people, about 75% of participants, conformed at least once on at least one trial and gave an incorrect answer to something that was very obviously correct. There was no way around this. So the question is, why do people conform? People tend to conform for one of two major reasons. So first of all, they may conform because of what we call normative social influence. We don't like being rejected. And remember, our brains and the way that they've been wired for hundreds of thousands of years has not necessarily caught up with the way that we live our lives. These days, ostracism does not mean death. You're not going to die if somebody doesn't like you. However, your brain is still kind of caught up in those old ancestral patterns where absolutely rejection meant ostracism and death. We don't like being rejected. And so part of the reason that we conform is because we want approval. We don't want to be rejected. On the other hand, you could join and conform to gain what we call informational social influence. This group may have information that you may not necessarily have if you're not conforming, if you're not part of the group. So I want to talk a little bit about things that will make us more or less likely to conform. And y'all, this is a test question. So I would say take very good notes on this particular slide because it will come up in a multiple choice question. So the things that make us less likely to conform, first of all, if you're really passionate about one of your attitudes or one of your beliefs, that's going to make you less likely to conform. So if you feel really strongly that smoking is not good for you, or that being unkind to others is not something that you're really interested in doing, if you feel really strongly about that, you're going to be less likely to go along with the group. Now, if it's an issue that you don't really care about, you're going to be more likely to conform. So if you feel very strongly about something, particularly if it comes from your personal experiences, you're going to be a lot less likely to conform with others. Part of the reason that I don't smoke is because, first of all, I watched my mother do it. I've watched my sister do it. I know how hard it is to quit. And also, I'm going to be completely honest with you. I'm a little vain, and I know what smoking does to your face and to your hands and especially to your lungs. And I want to have like the most beautiful lungs ever. I want to have the most beautiful lungs ever. So I feel pretty strongly about that. If somebody says, "Hey, do you want to smoke?" I'm going to be like, "Nah, I'm good." If on the other hand, you don't really care about smoking, you're going to be more likely to conform. If you have voiced your commitment to this belief or attitude out loud, so if other people know about this, you're going to be less likely to conform because, well, there's something about putting it out into the world or putting it in writing that really, really makes you want to commit to it in a way that not voicing it wouldn't. And then finally, if you don't see the group as that special, like if you have a group that's like, "Come on, have a smoke," and they're just not a group of people that you're interested in, if you think they're kind of annoying and you don't want their approval or you don't want their information, you're probably not going to conform. So the flip side of this is basically if you don't feel very strongly about something, if you haven't voiced your commitment or your belief, and if you do see the group as special, you're going to be more likely to conform. Anybody needs some more time here? We good? Okay. So let's talk a little bit about compliance. So I want to be clear that compliance is a little bit different from obedience. So I kind of mentioned that conformity is often going to be something that we tend to do at the peer level. Compliance is something that either involves in authority or peers, particularly peers. So compliance is basically doing what somebody asks you to do, and typically they're not going to be an authority figure. So I have a question for you. I want you to imagine that for whatever reason, you are not going to be able to take the 4th exam on Wednesday. And you can ask me if you can take a makeup exam in one of 2 ways. Dr. Gilchrist, I can't take the makeup exam. I need to take a makeup exam. I'm sick. Or Dr. Gilchrist, I need a makeup exam because I'm really sick and I'm puking all over the place. And my roommates are really complaining about the smell and things like that. Now, which of those do you think I'm more likely to believe? The first one? So here's what's really interesting. Any reason that you give me is going to have more influence than if you give me no reason at all. So what you are looking at here, and it doesn't even have to be relevant. So a lot of this work on compliance comes from the work of Robert Cialdini. So a lot of his stuff on compliance and persuasion tends to come from him. And this is really old school. Y'all know what a Xerox is. Yes, it's a copy machine. So what Cialdini basically found is that if you ask people to borrow a Xerox machine, and they're basically like, may I borrow your Xerox machine? And with no reason given, about 60% comply. But if you give a reason, can I please use your Xerox machine? Mine is broken. They're going to be really likely to comply. And here's the part that really kind of blows my mind, and maybe you will find this interesting as well. The reason that you need to use it does not need to be relevant to the current situation. So it could be, may I please use your Xerox machine? I'm not wearing the right kind of shoes today. Apparently, you will still get a really high level of compliance, even though you are giving an irrelevant reason. You get an equal level of compliance there. So what this means is that if you want something from me, you should give me a reason. Instead of, I need to take a makeup exam. I would also say, remember to use these powers for good, not for evil. Okay, so next, this is one that I very much love, and I actually kind of do this all the time. So remember how I mentioned the foot in the door technique, the idea that I can get you to do something really big by starting out with a small request and then very slowly in incremental ways, increasing the level of commitment. I can do something that's even better called the door in the face technique. So I can start with a really unreasonable request that nobody in their right mind would say yes to. And then obviously you're going to say no. And I go, okay, well, how about this? And then I give you what I really want. All of a sudden, in comparison with that unreasonable request that you just turned down, the real request looks far more reasonable in comparison. And as a result, you're going to be more likely to say yes. So Cialdini actually had people, ask if they were willing to take a group of juvenile delinquents to the zoo. And obviously, when you get the real request, very few people say yes. However, when Cialdini started with a far more unreasonable request, will you please watch this group of juvenile delinquents every day for the next 2 weeks? That's really unreasonable. Most people are going to say no, but when they followed that up with, oh, well, if that's too much for you, would you just take them to the zoo next week? And all of a sudden, about 50% of people will say yes. So the door in the face can actually be really useful. We actually kind of tried this a couple of weeks ago. We're trying to propose a new class, and quite a few people kind of pushed back against it being 3 credit hours. And so we said, let's propose it as 3. And if they don't like that, we'll give them 2, because 2 is what we really want. So all of a sudden 2 will seem far more reasonable than if we had originally just asked for 2. So yeah, I like the door in the face technique. Okay, but wait, there's more. That's an old clip from Epic Rap Battles of History. That is Billy Mays versus Ben Franklin.
Wow.
Yeah. I was going to say, if you haven't been watching Epic Rap Battles of History, you really should. They actually get a lot of really good history facts in there. The most recent one was Lara Croft versus Indiana Jones, and it's great. It is great. So Billy Mays was basically, he's no longer with us. He passed away like maybe 10 years ago or so, maybe 9 years or so. But he would have these infomercial ads on TV, and he'd always go, but wait, there's more. So he would sell things like OxyClean and stuff like that. So this is what is referred to as the "that's not all" technique. So we start with an inflated request, and then we either offer a discount or a bonus to make the original item seem more attractive. Who likes to shop at Kohl's? Now, why do you like Kohl's? You get good deals, right?
Mine keeps getting sent Kohl's cash.
Yeah, so we only buy things with Kohl's cash. She's gotten a free watch, a bunch of shirts. She hasn't actually spent anything this year.
Wow. Yeah, I was gonna say, Mike's mother gave him Kohl's cash once, and we used it to buy her Christmas presents. He's like, I've got this extra Kohl's cash she gave me. Let's just go and get her like a Christmas themed wine bottle holder, and she loves it. But it was used with stuff that she gave him. Okay. But when you go to Kohl's, one of the things you're going to notice is that almost everything is on sale all the time. And if you look at the actual tags, they will tell you that it was marked down to its current price. And they will usually have the suggested retail price on the tag to let you know what a great deal you're getting. And so you'll walk in the door and be like, I saved $100 on this. Yeah, but you still spent $100 on this. You are not actually saving anything. They are getting you to buy it by telling you what a good deal you're getting. So Cialdini did a study where people were at a bake sale, and they were told that cupcakes were either 75 cents or that they had been reduced to 75 cents. And what you will find is that more people buy the cupcakes when they are told that they have been reduced to 75 cents. Same price, but you feel like you're getting a better deal. You're not. I don't know about you, but if I hear that cupcakes have been reduced to 75 cents, I'm going to think they were made a couple days ago.
Yeah.
That's just me, though. You would be like, ooh, cupcake. Gimme. That's how I am with cupcakes in general. So the idea is that there's some initial high value in your mind, and that's basically going to make you more likely to buy it. Or another way that the "that's all" technique works is they throw in additional items to make it seem more attractive. So along with this hair dryer, we'll throw in a mini straightener and some hair scrunchies and some hair ties, all for a low value of $149.99, but we're selling it to you today for $50. Can you tell I've watched a lot of late night infomercials? My grandfather used to stay up really late watching real stories of the highway patrol and cops. And those were the kind of commercials that you would see. My grandmother was a nurse and worked the night shift. So yeah.
I feel like I kind of did this at my job when I would sell fudge.
I had a favorite like commercial.
Oh, yeah.
I watched it an hour a day every Saturday for like 14 years.
What one was it?
The red copper infomercial.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
There are some really ridiculous ones.
Set of red copper cans I got for my second birthday. 'Cause I was so obsessed with the.
Yeah, mine are always my favorite are the blank installments of 1999.
Yeah.
Added up, I like.
The ones I always like are the ones where people are clumsy with stuff that they really shouldn't be clumsy with. And we're like, we got this thing for you that will make it all better. When I was growing up, mine were probably Chia Pets and the Clapper.
Oh my god. Lights.
The old woman in the bed at the end. Okay, so our next compliance technique is what is called lowballing. This is when I secure your commitment ahead of time, and then I make it harder for you to back out later when I add additional costs. So basically, I'm going to secure your agreement, and then I'm going to increase it with a hidden cost. So for example, how many of you would come to one of my psychology studies if I told you it was at 7 o'clock in the morning? Yeah, okay, a few of you, but most of you would not. However, what I can do instead, if I want to get more people, is I can go, oh, hey, I am looking for people to participate in a psychology study. It's going to be at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. A lot of people are going to sign up for that. And then I can be like, oh, listen, I would never do this. I'm not a liar, but I would be like, I'm really sorry. It turns out I've got a conflict. We've got to do this at 7 o'clock in the morning. You're going to get a lot more people who are going to continue to take part in this study because I've already secured your yes. Most people, after they give a yes, do not want to back out. You're like, I would. Well, you're special then.
I don't think I would, but I wouldn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're like, Dr. Gilchrist, 7 o'clock. Are you out of your mind? I'm like, no.
I think it would interfere with my wanting to agree next time though. Like I wish.
I was gonna say, did they do a study with like a follow-up about the next time you say I've got a 2 o'clock study, how many does a repeat?
They
follow-up?
probably didn't care about that. And usually for a lot of these psychology studies, you don't get repeats. So I would never see you again anyway. Thankfully, we're here at Connie where I see like the same like 300 people year after year after year. So I wouldn't do that kind of stuff to you.
I do think it's kind of funny to be like, okay, I'm gonna do a psychology study, so I need you to show up at this time, but the act of them showing up is the psychology study.
Totally. Unfortunately, my studies are not that cool. Mine are like, let's listen to some noises. How much do these irritate you?
Like what happened when the people showed up at 7 a.m. where they're just like, okay, you're done.
They gave them something to do.
Okay.
They gave them something to do. I'm sure of that. Okay. So now we're going to talk about Milgram's study. So one thing that you need to know is that Stanley Milgram was actually a student of Solomon Asch's. So it's not really that surprising that the very controversial findings of a conformity study get even worse when we are talking about authority. So obedience compared to compliance. So compliance is doing what somebody asks you to do, and they're not an authority figure. Obedience is doing what somebody in authority tells you to. And generally, we don't think about it very much. So when I say, turn your papers in by this time, most of you will get it done. Most of you will not question it because, well, in some ways, I suppose I am an authority figure. I would say if your boss at work tells you to do something, that's going to be an even bigger deal. You are probably not going to say no to that. Now, the question becomes, generally, authority figures, they're not going to ask you to do something immoral, illegal, unethical, but we know that under certain circumstances, and you have to remember, so Stanley Milgram is in his 30s and in his 40s when we're learning a lot more, especially in the 50s and 60s, about the crimes that were committed during the Holocaust. And and especially when the Nuremberg trials were beginning, where the actual full depth of what was going on and the crimes that were being committed and the experiments that were being performed on these people who could not give their consent and were being very slow, were basically learning about a genocide. All of this is coming to light. And when you have these soldiers up on the stand who are being asked to answer for their crimes, they all say a very similar thing. I was just following orders. So the question becomes, how did these people who probably believe that they are good and decent people get put into this situation where they are dehumanizing people and effectively killing them? So Milgram was really interested in this. Is there something in our nature? Is there something in our nature that wants to be subjugated, that wants to be told what to do? And can we, yeah, I know I borrowed from Loki. I borrowed from Loki. I did. Is there something in our human nature that basically, even though most of us think we're good, kind, decent, good people, could we, in certain situations, hurt or even kill another human being simply because somebody in power told us to? And so this is where Milgram's obedience study back in 1962 really comes into play. This is an experiment that literally shocked the world. Yes, pun intended. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this study. And I'm going to go ahead and pause sharing because I am going to borrow from the movie Experimenter so that we can kind of watch this. So here is kind of what I am saying. Here is what I am saying here. Okay, we're gonna new share. There we go. Okay, so here's kind of what I'm saying here is that this is a situation where, in general, Milgram very, very strongly believed that this was due to the situation and not something in us. We want to shift responsibility when we do bad things to other people. And if we have somebody in authority who can do that, that is what we will do. We will shift that blame because we know it's not right. And you can watch if you watch some of these old videos, so many of these people, like the man that we saw, are protesting. But because of the situation, so I want to mention, these studies took place at Yale. These are not college students. These are people from the New Haven, Connecticut community. Most of those people are not involved with Yale in any sort of way. But Yale's pretty intimidating, right? So you go to Yale for a research study. There's a dude in a lab coat that kind of screams authority as well. It's part of the reason why I don't wear a lab coat. First of all, for a psychology experiment, wearing a lab coat is kind of silly because what mess am I going to get on my clothes? Like computer data? No, not really. So I try not to do that. And additionally, that symbol of authority, that vestige of authority, makes people less likely to protest. Now, occasionally, there are a couple of things that are kind of working against the participant. First of all, you don't actually see the person. You are not actually seeing the person as you hurt them. There is some level of being removed from them. And that makes it easier to do those things and to potentially dehumanize this person. It gets a bit more complicated when Milgram actually starts changing aspects of the environment. And we do find that there are facets of the environment that make obedience more or less likely. So when people ahead of time were told about this experiment, but they weren't told the results, most people were very shocked by these findings because, well, only a sick person would carry it out until the end. Most people thought that participants would drop out at about 75 volts. And as you can see, nobody really does. In fact, what you can see is that most people will deliver shocks. The majority of them, about 2/3 of participants, continue the study to the end, potentially delivering voltage between 435 and 450 volts. You don't really start getting people to drop out until about 75 to 120 volts, and even then it's very few. Now, Milgram was a strong believer that people are not bad people. It's the situation of the environment that we find ourselves in that affects whether or not we do things. So occasionally when I talk about this study, somebody will ask me, well, Milgram's original study only looked at men. Women are nicer. Women wouldn't do that. Oh, yes, they would. Here's the thing. Women are socialized to be more nurturing. Women are believed to be more nurturing. However, that doesn't really change anything. You can see that when Milgram did the exact same study with a group of women, you get the exact same obedience rates. So Milgram was really fascinated as to what aspects of the environment create obedience. And so he changed a variety of different experiments to see how obedience would change. So I mentioned that Yale is a pretty intimidating place. Maybe if they were in a place that were less intimidating, people would be less likely to obey. And we do actually find that that's the case. When the study took place in a standard office building rather than the original study at Yale, you only get about 45% of participants carrying out the obedience till the end. So clearly, Yale had an effect. If an ordinary person is in charge and not an experimenter wearing a lab coat, you are not going to get very high obedience. If the experimenter is in a remote location, so if the experimenter is telling you what to do over a telephone, you get less obedience. Why? Because they can't see you. So they're telling you what to do on the phone, and you're like, oh yeah, I'm totally delivering 450 volts. No, I'm not. He can't see me. So if the experimenter is not present in the room, we get less obedience. Obedience also does drop when the learner is in the same room as you and you have to watch them. So you actively get to see the outcome of what you do. Obedience drops to about 40%. If you have to actually punish the learner by taking their hand every time they get something wrong and putting it on a shock plate, obedience drops even more. When the authority figure is not near, obedience drops. When the victim is closer to you and can actually see you, and if you have to touch them, obedience drops. But the biggest way that we see obedience drop is if you have two other people that are taking part in this experiment with you, and you're all teachers. If you watch somebody else rebel and stand up to the experimenter, you are going to be more likely to do so yourself. So what a shock. Other people influence us. We're more likely to rebel and go against something and not obey when we see other people stand up for themselves. Remember, we like to conform. Yes.
Have they ever tried the experiment with people you know instead of strangers?
That's a really good question. I don't know off the top of my head, but I can look that up. People have tried to recreate Milgram's experiment, and many of them are quite successful. Now, for ethical reasons, we do not actually have it go up to 450. I think the current experiments, if you're trying to replicate, only go up to 150. And by the way, they do this with students that know about the Milgram experiment, still get obedience every single time. Just because you know about it doesn't mean it protects you. So the social situation that you find yourself in is a really powerful layer here. It's a powerful influence. So please don't walk out of class today thinking you're a sick, evil person. You're not. The situation that you find yourself in shapes your behavior more than you would know. Now, groups can also affect our behavior. We have what is called social facilitation. How many of you, for our athletes, do you perform better when you're at a home game or an away game? Who does better at home games? Most people, we do actually find, and most teams do better at home than away. And that's partially because when you are performing in front of other people that are supporting you, it actually facilitates your performance. This is what is called social facilitation. You work harder and you perform better when you're in front of other people. It's usually why when you're in performances, your dress rehearsal is usually garbage and your opening night is fantastic. There's something about being in front of a crowd that suddenly motivates you and energizes you and gives you the ability to do your best. Now, on the other hand, how many of you don't like group projects because somebody always slacks? Me too. I never wanted to do them in high school, ever. So how many can somebody clap for me right now, please? I need one person clapping, not all of you. Okay, thank you, Carrie-Ann. Okay, now everybody clap, Carrie-Ann, keep clapping. So I would bet you anything that Carrie-Ann clapped louder when she was doing it alone than when other people were clapping with her. And that's what we do tend to find with most people. This is a study that that people actually did, where they put headphones on people and made them believe that different numbers of people were either clapping or cheering. Here you can kind of see when you believe that you are the only one cheering or the only one clapping, you are louder. As more people begin to clap and cheer, you become quieter. This is what is referred to as social loafing. We tend to work less hard when we're in a group. Now, of course, it's a bit more complicated than that. Being in a group does not automatically lead to slacking, and your book talks about some of the reasons that is. But groups can affect our performance in a variety of different ways. Does anybody need some more time here? All right. How many of you are familiar with the concept of the purge? Yeah, probably. So 24 hours, all crime is legal, blah, 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 blah. But I want people to think about this. If you were invisible for 24 hours, if nobody could see what you did or knew that it was you doing it, what sort of things would you do? Would anybody do something illegal or generally bad just because they knew nobody could see them? It turns out that anonymity has a really powerful influence on us. It's part of the reason why the internet is, well, the internet. When people don't know who you are, when people cannot guess your identity, you are probably going to do things that you otherwise would not do if people knew who you were. It's part of the reason why when you're in large crowds of people, if rioting happens, what you're going to find is you're going to lose a lot of self-awareness and self-restraint and potentially behave in ways that you otherwise wouldn't. When you are in a big crowd, de-individuation occurs. You actually lose your sense of self. And that means you're going to be a lot more likely to do things that you otherwise would not do, like rioting or tearing down a goalpost on a football field with a bunch of other people. Nobody's going to know it's you. They can't catch all of you. And we do find that de-individuation is going to be a lot more likely if arousal or anonymity are high. We know that people are a lot more likely to deliver painful shocks to people if they are masked and nobody knows who they are. So to kind of get to your question, this kind of relates to your question on Milgram's obedience. We know that when people can see who you are, you're less likely to shock another participant. If you are masked and people do not know who you are, you're more likely to deliver those painful shocks. So I would imagine that if it was somebody you knew and they knew who you were, you would be a lot less likely to obey. I would think, just because of what we know about de-individuation. It's part of the reason why people who go and do bad things will often try to conceal their identity. First of all, because they don't want to be detected. Second of all, when you're in a large group of people and nobody knows who you are, that gives you, in de-individuation, so to speak, gives you the freedom to do things you otherwise wouldn't. Yes.
Is that also why, or like part of why it's found that people are less likely to do things they know they're not supposed to if there's a mirror?
Yes, that is exactly why. So one of the ways that they try to discourage theft is by putting mirrors in place, because if you look at yourself, the idea is it reminds you of who you are, and thus because you are individuated, you're going to be less likely to shoplift. That's kind of the idea. All right, we are out of time. We're going to talk a little bit about group polarization and group interaction. We're going to start talking about psychological disorders. We're going to talk about the DSM and anxiety disorders, and you will be good to go for your for your exam on Wednesday. I am probably going to record a review session for you this weekend because I know everybody's schedules are busy and I want to go to the dance concert on Tuesday and I need to eat beforehand. So I will record that this weekend going through the study guide, and I will make that available to you this weekend. Have a good weekend. Do not forget your forum post. And I think a quiz posted today too. All right, see you later, everybody.
Getting quizzes.